Welcome, everyone, to our podcast, Republic's Receipt. And if you're here for a boring rundown of the Philippine government textbooks, I'm afraid we're gonna disappoint you.
Because what we're going to talk about today is generally one of the most fascinating puzzles in Southeast Asian politics. How does a country that can barely collect its taxes, can fully control its territory, and has one of the most corruption riddled bureaucracies in the region still manage to stay in one piece?
I'm Ian, and with me today are my co hosts, Weena, Ashley, Chris, and Cha. We also have a very special guest joining a little later, Dr. Louis Ignacio. Dr. Ignacio is not only a seasoned political scientist, but also the Faculty of Arts and Letters Secretary in the University of the Santo Tomas. With that being said, welcome everyone.
Our episode today explores our local politics, posed directly by political scientists Patricio Abinales and Donna Amoroso in their landmark book, State and Society in the Philippines. And the puzzle is this: why has the Philippine state managed to stay resilient despite its weak institutions?
Cha, before we go any further, can you give us a quick overview of what we mean when we say weak state and strong society? Because that's the lens through which we're analyzing today.
Sure. As Abinales and Amoroso put it, why does the state not collapse? All the classic symptoms of state failure are present on paper. Taxes were uncollected, the bloated bureaucracy, the corruption, the uncontrolled crime, the armed insurgencies in Mindanao, and the too popular arising that overthrew presidents. But the state continues on. And the point they're making is that it's not the government they're saving, it's the society. Where the government is weak, the networks, the patrons, the local elites, the church, the barangay fills in the gaps.
And that's the weak state, strong society framework. The state is institutionally underdeveloped. That is, on its own, it does not have the formal structures to enforce the rule of law or provide services. But society is strong, meaning Filipino communities have developed robust informal system to keep things functioning.
Ash, Chris, anything to add on what means in everyday terms before we dig deeper?
I want to add that in many provinces, the people will not approach the government when they have a problem. They visit the local politician, the landlord, or even the parish priest. That's the social network doing the work that the state is supposed to do.
Or consider paluwagan, the informal rotating credit system where members save money and rotate how much is paid out in lump sum. Banks are the formal institution which should give credit. However, for many Filipinos, it's more effective to use paluwagan, which is not based on paperwork, but on trust and social relationships.
Our thesis today is this: that the Philippine state has survived not because its institutions are strong, but because the shocks it has to deal with are absorbed by the Filipino society through the Patreon client networks, local elites, religious institutions, and informal economies. To find out, one must go back to history.
Moving on to the first big question: why is the Philippine state weak? And structurally weak, not bad government weak. Let's start with you, Weena.
Right. So Abinales and Amoroso trace the roots of state weaknesses all the way back to colonial period. And it's not just the Spanish. Actually, the American colonial state is particularly important here. The Americans who came in after in 1898 had a certain philosophy of governance. They believed that political power should be local. They believed that political power should be decentralized. In 1900s, McKinley stated in his instructions to the Taft Commissions that the presumption should always be in favor of the smaller subdivision, which meant power should rest with local governments, not the central state.
And what did that actually was essentially created a political system from the bottom up. Municipal elections started in 1901, provincial election in 1902. The Ilustrados and other landed families, Filipino elites, soon realized that to controlling the local networks, they controlled the rest of it. The local leaders were relied on by the provincial governor. The assembly member was reliant on provincial networks.
This is where the concept of Cacique democracy comes in, right? Benedict Anderson uses that term, Cacique, being a Spanish word for local strongman or chieftain. It is saying that democracy in the Philippines was captured since inception by the local elites who were able to use democratic institutions not for the people but for their own aggrandizement. which were lands, businesses, and political dynasties.
So, the architecture of the Philippine state was built or at least developed to centralize power in the hands of local elites, rather than establish a Weberian professional bureaucracy, and that has implications.
Massive consequences. Read what happened to the Philippine National Bank in the 20s. The bank was basically run by one of the most influential politicians of the American colonial period, Sergio Osmeña, who filled it with his political cronies who did not know how to operate a financial institution. Loans were given to cronies, corruption was rampant, but when Americans attempted to reform it, Osmeña invoked the principle of nationalism as a protective shield. Any American critic was called the anti-Filipino. National interest came to mean personal profit.
I don't take nationalism as a tool to promote cronyism is something that happened in the past only. Okay, Cha, what do you think connects that to what we see now?
Consider how politicians today still package their family agenda, the rhetoric of service, or aming provincia or regional pride. If a government makes sure that all government contracts go to relatives or associates of his, he generally portrays that as a way to give local opportunities. The logic has remained unchanged since Osmeña's day.
And this is directly linked to the lack of bureaucratic autonomy. As Abinales and Amoroso put it, a competent state would need to be free from political influence, embedded autonomy, as Evans put it. The bureaucracy, however, has always been a source of spoils in the Philippines. The Filipinos selected are based on politics and not on merit. Whoever rules, the president rules appointments from top to bottom, in all the departments, down to provincial level.
Well, Wina, let's talk about Manuel Quezon for a moment, as his Commonwealth presidency is a case point of how state centralization can actually be a source of weakness rather than a cure.
Yes, by the 1930s, Quezon was the most powerful political figure in the Philippines. He cited the Sakdal Uprising of 1935, which we shall be coming back to later, to justify the connection of power under the presidency. He ran the civil service, the budget bureau, and the legislature by patronage. I am paraphrasing what he once said: I am Manuel L. Quezon, I am the Filipino people, I am the Philippines. Identification of a leader with the state itself is a red flag for institutional weakness.
Because what that means is the state functions as long as the strongman is in control. The network ceases to exist when he's gone. It is the same thing with Marcos, with Estrada, and it is happening now. The state turns into personalistic instead of institutionalistic.
And let's not forget weak law enforcement. As the colonial state created constabulary forces, Abinales and Amoroso explained that they were also used to protect elite interests, like crushing the Sakdalistas and disrupting peasant unions, instead of upholding non-partisan law and order. That's a history that has led to the sentiment that everyone wants law and order but no one trusts the police.
To sum up the first 10 minutes, the Philippine state is weak because it was built on patronage and not professionalism. Local elites took control of democratic institutions early on. As the bureaucracy has never enjoyed the real independence from political influence, the culture of bossism and the patron who gives and then takes loyalty has been a constant since the Spanish era and into the colonial era and the Republic.
Another important term, we should define bossism. A boss is a local political patron in the Philippine politics who exerts control over resources, including jobs, contracts, protection, and distributes to those who give or her votes and loyalty. The boss doesn't necessarily have to be a criminal, but he can be. He's a substitute for the state, he does what the state doesn't.
Which then leads us right into the second part of our analysis. Since the boss is needed only because society has learned to operate around the weak state, which is the strength of society.
So, as I said, by formal measures, the Philippine state is weak. Unreliable law enforcement, inconsistent enforcement, inability to collect taxes from powerful corrupt institutions, and politicized bureaucracy. But the Philippines has not fallen. In a classic sense, no state failure has occurred. Why?
This is where Abinales and Amoroso's frameworks becomes really interesting. Their argument is that it's not the state that binds the Philippines together. It's the dense net of social relationships the Filipinos have created over the years. And these works on various levels.
Let's start with the most basic unit, patron-client bonds. The patron-client relationship is one of the most basic forms of organization in Philippine society in politics. The patron, landlord, politician, parish priest, barangay captain, supplies resources, protection, and access. The client then gives loyalty, labor, and votes. It is personal, but it's also transactional. It's about obligation, the debt of gratitude, utang na loob as we call it.
And utang na loob is important not only because it is contractual, but because it's a moral relationship. If a politician pays for your family's hospital expenses, or if a landlord pays for your rice, you owe them something as well. You owe them gratitude, loyalty, and your vote. That is why political mobilization in the Philippines is different from the West. It's not a matter of ideology in the main sense. It's relational.
These patron-client networks are social forces, as Joel Migdal calls them, which are powerful mechanisms of associative behavior. They may be informal, but I wouldn't call them weak. In fact, the word of the patron is more important than any government directive in many provinces. He can mobilize more people to respond to disasters, help mediate more conflicts, and demand more compliance than the local government unit ever can.
Beyond the patrons, there were elite families, which in modern terms would be political dynasties. As Abinales and Amoroso demonstrate, politicians such as Quezon and Osmeña used family connections, provincial alliances, and marriages to consolidate power even during the American colonial period. Anderson writes the legislators went to the same churches, lived the same neighborhoods, and arranged marriages for their children. They were actually forming self-conscious ruling class.
And that ruling class has continued. In present times, about 70 to 80% of the Philippines legislators are from political dynasties. Family members of Marcos and Ilocos Norte, Dutertes from Davao, ang Patuan family in Maguindanao, which naturally is another case study on position.
The crucial analytical question is whether these dynasties, despite their misgovernments, offer some sort of political security. They are familiar with their terrain, they help keep the peace in the area, they are generous in granting patronage, though unevenly distributed. It does not lead to complete social disintegration. With weak state institutions, the dynasties move in.
There's also the Catholic Church. This is a social force whose influence in the Philippines is really extraordinary. Abinales and Amoroso note that almost 83% of Filipinos are Catholic, and religious actors have been among the most powerful social forces in the Philippine history. In 1986, Radio Veritas and Cardinal Sins called to the streets brought down Marcos with the help of the church. It has rallied millions of people. It has social services, facilities like hospitals, schools, and relief, which the state can't sustain.
And it's not just the Catholic Church. The Iglesia ni Cristo has approximately 3 million members. They vote as a unit and independently talks to presidential candidates. Social forces that serve stabilizing roles include Protestant evangelical networks and Muslim organizations in Mindanao. They provide the people with identity, community, and moral order, services that the state should provide but doesn't.
Let's also consider the informal economy here, Wina. I think it's worth to think of the paluwagan example that Chris mentioned earlier.
Yes, and this relates to the informal institution as well. An informal institution is a rule, norm, or practice that is not a law, but is often followed because it works, because it's enforced through social pressure and reputation instead of legal sanction. Paluwagan is just one of them. There's no contract, no collateral, no credit score. Social trust in a network is what makes it work. But you lose your relationships, your reputation, and your social standing if you abscond with the funds.
These informal economies are not limited to paluwagan. Sari-sari stores that extend credit to neighbors, the notion of bayanihan or communal labor during times of trouble, the OFW remittance system in which families abroad help their extended relatives at home, which serves as an important social safety net that the state's social welfare system is unable to cover. All of these are informal institutions which fill economic functions that the formal state cannot or will not.
NGOs too are part of this picture. The Philippine civil society is one of the most dynamic in Southeast Asia. Post Marcos, there was a proliferation of NGOs, people's organizations, sectoral organizations, women's organizations, peasants' federations, and urban poor communities. It is important to note that Abinales and Amoroso use the term social forces instead of social society, since it is not a force outside the state, but a force in the state. The former activists enter the rank of the government. NGOs operators get converted to bureaucrats. The flow of state and society is ever present.
That is one reason why the state remains, after all, because the society continues to feed its citizens who bring to it ability and commitment that the political system can generate. Abinales and Amoroso call this island of state strength in an ocean of weakness. Now let's hear it from the professionals. I'm happy to welcome Professor Doc Louis R. Ignacio to us today. Doc Louis Ignacio is a political scientist at the University of Santo Tomas and is kindly joined us here for this portion of the discussion. Welcome, Doc Louis.
So, for our case study today, we're looking at Sakdal Revolt of 1935. The Sakdalists were a mass movement of landless peasants and the rural poor who were oppressed by landlords, but the colonial state would not deal with the problem because the landlords had too much political power. They petitioned, they challenged in court, and they even got elected to Congress. But nothing worked. Eventually, they came armed, marched to their municipal buildings, and were crushed by constabulary in 2 days. And the one thing that actually got their leader, Salud Algabre, out of prison wasn't an appeal of or court ruling, but Senator Vicente Soto personally stepping out in for her. So you have the state with weakness. You have the social network doing what the formal system couldn't. You have Quezon using the whole crisis to consolidate more power under the presidency and not to solve the problem. In many respects, Sakdal Revolt encapsulates the whole weak state, strong society framework. Do you think the dynamic still continues to happen in the Philippines today? Doc Louis, where informal networks fill gaps in formal institutions and the state does not revolve under the underlying problem but rather consolidates power?
When I teach introductory courses in political science, what I usually ask as one of the key readings is Bernard Creek's On Defense of Politics. And Bernard Creek defines politics as a discipline or a practice that uses compromise to resolve conflict without the use of undue violence. And using that as a definition of politics tells us that as long as it is within the realm of politics, negotiations, compromise will always be present. Key actors will always engage with other key actors, negotiating, lobbying, pushing for their agenda. And of course, the other parties would do the same, so that they would end with a resolution that is acceptable to both parties. Now, as a core definition of politics, it is expected and it is still observable in not only in Philippine politics, not only in local but also national politics, but also in other countries. That concept of politics, that definition of politics, is very much observable. No? So when we talk about negotiations between actors in politics, engagement between parties in politics, whether it's an internal agreement or a debate in a plenary in the House or in the Senate, it always boils down to compromise. It always boils down to negotiation and compromise. Now, will it affect the kind of democracy that we have? Will it affect the dynamics, or is it a dynamics that is still observable today? Yes, definitely, it is still observable. Will it affect the kind of democracy that we have? I think the fact that we still use negotiations, whether it's in a caucus, an executive meeting, or again in the plenary, shows that we are still a fairly democratic country. I mean, that's a very simplistic way to look at it, no? But the government has no other way in resolving issues but through negotiations like this. They cannot they cannot use violence, they cannot end up with conflict, for example. It will always be done through these negotiations. And it's also true not only within the government, but also with the government negotiating with non-government actors, civil society, other organizations outside of the government structure. And a good number of laws, a good number of policies are developed because of these negotiations. Now, if what we are seeing today are policies, laws that are influenced by this negotiation, to me, that's a manifestation of a very strong society, but not necessarily a weak state. No, a government that listens to its people cannot be categorized as something that is weak. It is part of their responsibility to listen to their people. So if the process is structured, meaning you have civil society, non-government organizations really given platform and opportunity to share and engage with government entities, that's a manifestation of a strong society, but not necessarily a weak state. To me, to me, that's a manifestation of a state, of a government that is actually working for its people, and which is what is expected, especially for a democratic state.
When the Sakdal revolt erupted, Quezon's reaction was not to change the land system but to centralize more power. As the social force increased, the state increased its control as well. Does that tell us something about how state weakness and social strength do not just go hand in hand but thrive in one another?
Of course, when we look at the action of Quezon during that time, we have to put it in context. No? Every decision made has to be understood within the context of when it was made. The decision to centralize could be brought about by the extent of the non-government organizations or civil societies aggressiveness in pushing for what they want. When we centralize power, it could be one of two things. Number one, we centralize because of capacity. There's not enough capacity outside of the central power to administer what needs to be done. Second is the vulnerability of actors outside of the central power. So concentrating power at the center, at the government, may look negative on one hand because it's as if you are controlling everything, and moving towards, let's say, authoritarian or totalitarian. But again, we have to look at context. During the time, it may be necessary to centralize power in the government. Now, if we look at the same situation, again, we look at the context. Do we have a structure that is in place that will allow the government to still maintain control, but disperse authority and decentralize decision making, because when they disperse authority and decentralize decision making, it allows and it gives more opportunity for non-government organization, for civil society to participate, which is good, no, for a democratic state. So again, it's really context based. Then it may be necessary. Today is a totally different context, and it would be better if the government would decentralize, bring the discussion outside of the central government and closer to civil society.
Right, and more than 80% of Congress is made up of political dynasties, and the constitutional ban has yet to be implemented in the law after 40 years. Why hasn't that changed?
It's difficult to expect politicians who benefit from the presence of political families to act against it. So the question of why does it still exist, or why don't we have a law yet that will prohibit political dynasties, is because the same people who will act on it are members of political families and they are benefiting from it. One way to address this is to really have mature elections, not mature voters, because I'd like to believe that we are mature enough, but mature elections, meaning there is genuine option for the voters to choose from, and they should not be left with candidates who bear the same last name.
Do you think voters even want to change it though? The dynasty is usually the one that comes out to provide relief after typhoons, and even gives out scholarships, meaning that people aren't voting for them blindly.
I think we need to correct that idea. No? It's not the political families that are providing this. It's the funds of the government. It's government resources. It just so happened that they're there and they're the ones who should be giving it, literally just handing it, because again, the money is from the government. So it's not as if people, I'd like to believe, no, that people vote people do not vote just because they don't know, okay? People vote only within what is available to them, no? Again, it's the choices that they have. It's difficult to want to clamor for change if the options that are given to you will not lead to change. No? I'd like to believe that if given the chance to vote for someone, and when people realize that it's not these families who are giving them relief, then we can change that. We can change the scenario. We can change how most local governments are run by political families.
Doc, one final question before we move to conclusion. Do you see any sign that this dynamic is shifting? Are there any contemporary developments, whether in civil society or institutional reform, that suggest the state might be getting stronger in ways that would change this equation?
Because to me, the argument of a strong state, weak society, and weak state, strong society, puts the two actors in opposite ends. While, in fact, for a state to be strong, it needs the society to be strong. Okay? I think we should not look at these two parties at opposing ends. No? For a state to be strong, it has to make civil society strong. No? As it is, the Philippine government, the structure of how we manage things already allows civil society, non-government organizations to participate. And the government would want the civil society, non-government organizations to be strong so that it can maximize on that strength in providing, in deciding what the people need. Again, it should not be a dichotomy. It should not be one against the other. The non-government organization should not be treated as an alternative. The civil society should not be considered as an alternative to the state. It should be considered as supplemental, as support to the state. That's the ideal way to look at it. No? But then again, those who are in government are people with desires, and the way they perceive and decide whether civil society is helping them or not really depends on that political agenda. No, but again, ideally, to me, they should not be seen as opposing ends. One should complement the other.
Indeed, a insightful and knowledgeable answer. Once again, Doc Louis R. Ignacio, thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us today. We really appreciate it.
Let's quickly go through the takeaways before we close. Ash, what's the one thing you want listeners to remember about the weakness of the state?
Well, that it itself is not accidental. The Philippine state is weak because powerful interests, the landed class, political dynasties, crony capitalists have been able to maintain the state in that condition. Those who seek a weak state and those who fear a strong one can make up a majority coalition. Abinales and Amoroso argued that too many people are threatened by reform.
Cha,
The society is strong, but at a price. The country is operating by patron-client relations, informal economies, and local strongmen, which also helps sustain inequality and dependency. Informal institutions are the source of the greatest benefit for those who have the most social capital, rather than the poor.
and of course, Chris?
That weak state does not mean no state. The Philippines was able to keep its territory intact, hold regular elections, sustain 2 popular revolts, and have a constitutional democracy. It tells us that resilience can be found in unexpected places, including in the very informality that makes political scientists nervous.
Moving forward, what implications does this have for the governance of the Philippines? Abinales and Amoroso conclude by the concept of islands of state strength consisting of professional civil servants, reformist politicians, and strong civil society organizations. And that knowledge of the history of state-society relation is the first step towards changing it. Without understanding, there's no way to fix it.
The enigma of the Philippines' resilience is far from being just academic. It's a very practical issue whether the next generation of Filipinos will continue to live in the same informal settings, under the same patron-client-based dependency, under the same inequality, or whether we can create something better. But the answer starts with dialogues such as this one.
Before we wrap up, we need to recognize our sources.
The main source for this episode is State and Society in the Philippines by Patricio and Abinales and Donna J. Amoroso. We have specifically referenced Chapter 1, Introducing Philippine Politics, which introduces the conceptual framework and the concept of social forces, and Chapter 6, The Filipino Colonial State, 1902 to 1946, which outlines the developments of Cacique democracy, patron-client politics, and Quezon's centralization.
We also drew on Benedict Anderson's concept of Cacique democracy from the Spectre of comparisons, and Joel Migdal's theory of social forces from state power and social forces.
For the Sokdal case, our key primary source was the interview with Salud Algabre, reproduced in David Sturtevant's popular uprising in the Philippines, 1840 to 1940.
Thank you so much for listening. This is our take on the Philippines' central puzzle, weak state but strong society. Hopefully it inspired you.
And many thanks to Doc Louis R. Ignacio for joining as our guest today. Your insights were invaluable.
Until the next time.